Hello, and welcome to Sleep to Stories. And in today's story, we're going back to a quiet street on the edge of a big American city where a small cardboard box was sitting in the weeds. Nobody knew what was inside. For 65 years, one small boy would have no name, no family, and no answers. Investigators would try everything they had. And in the end, the truth would not come from a detective at all, but from a stranger, decades later, who had no idea they were about to solve the coldest case in the city's history. If you're the kind of person who likes falling asleep to stories like this one, quiet, a little heavy but told gently, then you might want to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next one. But for now, let's get back to it. It was February of 1957 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Back then, the edge of the city still felt half like the countryside. Streets turned into fields. Fields turned into thick patches of trees and brush. One of those patches sat along Susquehanna Road in a neighborhood called Fox Chase. Not far away stood a Catholic home for troubled young girls and a small college called La Salle. On February 23rd, a college student was walking near that patch of trees. He noticed something strange in the weeds. It was a large cardboard box. Through a gap, he thought he saw something pale inside. He believed it was a doll. He kept walking. He did not look closer. At the time, there was no reason to think otherwise. 2 days later, on February 25th, a different man was walking through the same area. He was checking traps he had set for muskrats, small animals that live near water. He came across the same box. This time, he looked inside. What he found was not a doll. Inside the box was the body of a young boy. He was naked. He had been wrapped loosely in an old flannel blanket, the kind of cheap blanket found in almost any home at the time. The box itself was easy to recognize. It was a shipping box from J.C. Penney, the kind used to sell a baby bassinet, a small bed for infants. Someone had used this box, made for something soft and new, to hide a child who was already gone. The man ran to get help. Soon, a police officer named Elmer Palmer arrived at the scene. He would later say this was the case that stayed with him for the rest of his life, the one that haunted everybody who worked on it. Palmer looked at the small body in the box, and he understood right away that this was not going to be a simple case. By the next day, February 26th, the Philadelphia Police Department had officially opened an investigation. They took the boy's fingerprints, hoping to match them to any record, anywhere. But he was so young that his fingerprints did not match anything on file. There was no missing child report that matched him either. It was as if he had appeared from nowhere, with no name and no history. Investigators guessed the boy was somewhere around 4 to 6 years old. He was thin. He showed signs that suggested he had been treated poorly for some time before he died, not just on the day he was found. This was not a single, sudden act of harm. This looked like the end of something that had been happening quietly for a while behind closed doors where nobody outside could see it. The police commissioner at the time, a man named Thomas Gibbons, decided this case could not be solved quietly. He approved something Philadelphia had never really done before at this scale. Police made posters with the boy's face on them, a drawing based on how he looked, gentle enough to show to the public. These posters went up on poles and walls across the entire city. Then they went further. Tens of thousands of flyers were sent out. They went to doctors. They went to hospitals. They went to police stations across Pennsylvania and into nearby states. If this boy had ever been seen by anyone, anywhere, official records might hold some trace of him. But the police did not stop there. In one of the biggest efforts of its kind, they arranged for the boy's picture to be printed and sent out with something almost every home received, the gas and electric bill. Around 300,000 households in the city opened their utility bill that month and found the face of an unknown little boy looking back at them. Somewhere in that city, someone almost certainly knew who he was. Somewhere in that city, someone may have opened that very bill, seen that face, and said nothing. Investigators also worked the box itself. They found a serial number on it, a manufacturing code that could, in theory, be traced. This felt like a real lead. They followed it back to a JCPenney store in Upper Darby, a nearby town, where that batch of boxes had been sold. For a moment, it seemed like they were closing in on an answer. But the trail went cold there. Too many boxes like that one had been sold to too many people with no way to know which buyer mattered. The box, their strongest physical clue, led nowhere. With no fingerprint match, no missing child report, and no lead from the box, the case slowly lost momentum. Eventually, the boy's body was buried in what was called a potter's field, a burial ground set aside for people who died with no name and no family to claim them. He went into the ground in Holmesburg in an unmarked grave, still unknown. For years, the official investigation quieted down. But not everyone let it go. One man in particular refused to stop thinking about the boy. His name was Remington Bristow, and he worked for the city's medical examiner's office, the office that deals with unexplained deaths. On his own time, for decades, he kept digging. At one point, he came across a bassinet at an estate sale, a sale of someone's belongings after they died or moved away. He believed this bassinet matched the box the boy had been found in. This discovery led him to suspect a specific local family. Bristow spent years quietly building his case around that family. He never had enough proof to bring formal charges. But he never fully dropped his suspicion either, and he kept the case alive in people's minds long after the police had moved on to other things. Decades passed. The boy remained unidentified, but people in Philadelphia had not forgotten him. A group called the Vidocq Society, a private club of retired detectives and forensic experts who worked on unsolved cases for free, took an interest in his story. Because of their efforts, in November of 1998, the boy's body was dug up for the first time since burial. This is called an exhumation. The goal was to take a tooth and try to pull DNA from it, genetic material that might one day be matched to a family member. At the time, the attempt did not succeed. The technology simply was not ready yet. Still, the Vidocq Society wanted to give him some dignity. On November 11, 1998, he was buried again, this time under a proper headstone. The stone did not have his real name because nobody knew it yet. Instead, it read, "America's Unknown Child." For the first time, he had a kind of identity, even if it was not his own. Then, in 2002, 45 years after his body was found, a strange new lead appeared. A woman, speaking only through a psychiatrist and using a fake name, said her mother had bought a boy from human traffickers and beaten him to death. She said the boy's name had been Jonathan. For a while, this seemed like it might finally be the answer everyone had been waiting for. But as investigators looked closer, the story did not hold up. Details did not match. Eventually, This lead was treated as false, another dead end in a case that seemed to collect them. By this point, decades had passed with almost no real progress. But the world outside the investigation was changing fast. Home DNA testing was becoming common. Ordinary people were sending small samples of their own saliva to companies like Ancestry.com just out of curiosity about where their families came from. Nobody connected this new hobby to an unsolved murder from 1957. Why would they? In March of 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added the boy's DNA profile to their database. They also released a new facial reconstruction, an updated image showing what he might have looked like, built using modern techniques. It was one more attempt to jog someone's memory somewhere. Then, in 2019, his body was exhumed a second time. Scientists wanted another sample, hoping newer methods could pull out DNA that earlier tests could not reach. This time, the science had caught up. This time, they got something usable. What almost nobody realized at that moment was that the final piece of the puzzle would not come from the police files at all. It would come from a total stranger, someone with no connection to this case, who had simply mailed in a DNA kit out of curiosity about their own family tree. Now let me walk you through what investigators eventually pieced together and how this case, silent for 65 years, finally broke open. A genetic genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick took the DNA sample recovered from the boy's remains. Genetic genealogy works by comparing someone's DNA to large public databases made up of ordinary people who submitted their own samples, usually just to learn about their ancestry. Fitzpatrick searched these databases for anyone whose DNA showed a partial match to the boy's. Eventually, she found one. It was not a parent. It was not a sibling. It was a distant cousin, someone who had no idea they were related to a murder case at all. This person had simply taken a home DNA test, curious about their own background, and uploaded the results to a genealogy website. That one distant match became the thread investigators needed. From that cousin, they began building out a family tree, working backward and sideways through generations, connecting relatives on the mother's side of the family. Slowly, a shape began to form. Eventually, using old birth records, they were able to work forward again from the mother's family toward one specific child born in a specific year to a specific father. On November 30th, 2022, Philadelphia police confirmed internally that they had finally identified the boy. Then on December 8th, 2022, the police commissioner at the time, Danielle Outlaw, stood in front of cameras and said his name out loud for the first time in 65 years. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13th, 1953. That means he was around 4 years old when he died, matching what investigators had believed all along. Investigators learned that Joseph had siblings. Both of his biological parents had already died by the time he was finally identified, so neither of them could ever be questioned about what happened to him. Out of respect for the relatives who are still alive today, the police chose not to publicly release the parents' names. Even with Joseph's name known at last, the question of who hurt him remained unanswered. Police said they did have suspicions about who was responsible, but they refused to say who because the case was still technically open and because they did not yet have enough proof to formally charge anyone. A police captain named Jason Smith admitted that actually proving who killed Joseph, after so many decades, all uphill from here, would be extremely difficult. The people involved may be gone. The evidence from 1957 was never going to be as strong as evidence from a case today. Still, the police announced a reward, $20,000 for any information that could lead to an arrest and conviction. And more than that, the success of Joseph's case changed how the department worked going forward. The Philadelphia Police Department created an ongoing genetic genealogy program, using the same method that had finally given a name to the boy in the box. In September of 2024, investigators went back to that same Potter's Field in Holmesburg, the burial ground for the unnamed, and exhumed 8 other unidentified bodies. Using the same DNA techniques that solved Joseph's case, they are now hoping to give names back to people who, like Joseph once was, have been resting for years with no one to claim them. For 65 years, Joseph Augustus Sorelli was only known as a face on a poster, a stranger printed on a gas bill, a name carved onto a stone that was not really his. Now, at last, the world knows who he was. But the person who put him in that box has never been named. Somewhere, that answer may still be sitting quietly waiting, the same way Joseph's name once did, for someone, somehow, to finally bring it into the light. That's it for today's story. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this one, take a look around the rest of the channel. There are more stories like this waiting for you, and plenty more on the way. If there's a case you'd like me to cover next, or if tonight's story left you with any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. I really do read them. This has been Sleep to Stories. Good night, and sleep well.